I realized I had been erased from my own family before the wedding ceremony even started. Not because anyone said it directly, not because there was a fight, but because I watched the photographer unfold a printed schedule and quietly cross my name off the family portrait list. I was standing 20 feet away holding a box of emergency supplies I had personally assembled for my sister's wedding day. Bobby pins, sewing kit, bandages, pain relievers, phone chargers. The kind of things responsible people think about when everyone else is busy celebrating. The photographer looked confused. My mother leaned toward him and lowered her voice. I wasn't supposed to hear it. She doesn't need to be in the immediate family photos. The photographer nodded. Then he drew a line through my name, just like that. 36 years of being a daughter reduced to one stroke of a pen. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. At the time, I was 36 years old, single, worked as a financial compliance manager, and had spent most of my adult life doing something nobody in my family ever acknowledged: keeping them afloat. If you had asked my relatives back then who the successful daughter was, every single one of them would have said my younger sister, Ava. Ava was beautiful. Ava was charming. Ava had nearly 80,000 followers online. Ava had engagement photos featured in wedding blogs. Ava had the kind of life that looked expensive, and expensive was exactly the problem, because for nearly a decade, somebody had been quietly paying for pieces of that life. That somebody was me. Nobody knew it. Not my cousins, not my aunts, not even Ava, at least not completely. My mother had spent years making sure of that. The wedding was being held outside Charleston, South Carolina, at a waterfront venue that looked like something from a magazine. White flowers, string lights. Perfect weather, perfect smiles, perfect lies. I had arrived 3 days early because my mother called crying about how overwhelmed she was. The florist had made mistakes. The seating chart needed fixing. The welcome bags weren't finished. The transportation schedule was a disaster. Could I help? Of course I could. I always could. I used vacation days from work. I drove 6 hours. I checked guests into hotels. I organized vendor payments. I solved problems nobody else wanted to solve. And every time someone thanked my mother for the flawless wedding planning, she accepted the praise like she had done it all herself. By the rehearsal dinner, I was exhausted. But that wasn't unusual. I had been exhausted for most of my life. Looking back, the warning signs started years earlier. I just ignored them because I thought love was supposed to look like sacrifice. My father lost his job when I was 27. At least that's what I was told. A few weeks later, my mother called me crying. They were behind on bills. The mortgage was becoming impossible. Dad was embarrassed. Could I help temporarily? Temporarily became monthly. Monthly became years. Years became normal. Every month money left my account and entered theirs. I never told anybody, not even close friends. Partly because I didn't want my parents embarrassed. Partly because I genuinely believed we were a family helping each other survive. When Grandma Evelyn was alive, she occasionally asked strange questions. Questions I didn't understand at the time. Are they still taking money from you? That was one. I remember it because she asked it during Thanksgiving 2 years before she died. I laughed, told her nobody was taking anything, I was helping. Grandma looked at me for several seconds. Then she simply nodded. Now I wish I had asked why. Grandma Evelyn wasn't the emotional type. She had owned a small accounting firm in Charleston for almost 40 years. She trusted documents more than promises, records more than stories. When she spoke, people listened, including my mother, especially my mother. But after Grandma died 18 months before the wedding, something changed. My mother seemed relieved. At the time, I thought it was grief ending. Now I know better, because Grandma had been the only person in the family who asked questions, the only person who noticed patterns. The only person who occasionally looked at me with an expression that said she knew more than she was saying. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5. Not because I needed to, because there was too much to do. By 7, I was coordinating deliveries. By 9, I was helping vendors find locations. By noon, I hadn't eaten. Around 1 o'clock, I found my mother standing outside the bridal suite. She was glowing, laughing, accepting compliments, being celebrated. She hugged me briefly. The same kind of hug she always gave. A hug that felt more like a receipt than affection. Everything's running smoothly, she said. Good. Then she turned away to greet somebody more important. That should have hurt. Instead, it felt familiar. I spent most of my childhood being useful. Useful children get praised differently, not for who they are, for what they provide. Ava got attention. I got responsibilities. Ava got celebrations. I got tasks. Eventually, you stop expecting anything else. Then came the photos, the moment everything shifted. The ceremony hadn't started yet. Guests were arriving. Music was playing softly. I was carrying supplies toward the bridal suite when I noticed the photographer reviewing his schedule. My name was listed. I remember seeing it. Lauren Family Portrait Group. A few minutes later, my mother approached him. They spoke quietly. The photographer made notes. Then he crossed out my name. I froze. Not because I couldn't believe it, because I could. Deep down, I could. Every ignored birthday, every holiday where my gift was forgotten, every family decision made without me, every sacrifice accepted as expected. All of it suddenly fit together. The photographer looked up and saw me watching. For a moment, he seemed uncomfortable. Then he returned to work, because to him, I was just another guest. My mother had already decided I wasn't family. I walked away before anyone saw my face. I found an empty hallway inside the venue and sat alone. For several minutes, I stared at the floor. Not crying, not angry, just tired, a different kind of tired. The kind that arrives when you've spent years carrying something heavy and finally realize nobody asked you to. They just never stopped handing it to you. That was when my phone vibrated. One text message, unknown number. The area code was Charleston. I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. Ms. Mitchell, this is Robert Kessler. I was your grandmother's attorney. We need to speak before your family leaves Charleston. I stared at the screen, then read it again. My grandmother's attorney. The wedding music drifted through the walls, guests laughed somewhere outside. And for the first time all day, a question entered my mind. What had Grandma known? I almost didn't respond. The timing felt impossible. My grandmother had been gone for 18 months. The wedding was already underway. And after years of family drama, I had developed a habit of postponing uncomfortable questions. But something about the message bothered me, not the attorney. The phrase, before your family leaves Charleston. As if whatever he needed to tell me had an expiration date. As if somebody else wasn't supposed to hear it first. I typed back. Who gave you this number? The response came less than a minute later. Your grandmother. I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. Please call when you have privacy. Outside, the wedding coordinator announced seating. The ceremony was beginning. I slipped my phone into my purse and walked toward the waterfront lawn. The rest of the afternoon felt strangely distant, like I was watching someone else's life. Ava looked beautiful. My father cried during the ceremony. My mother smiled for every camera. Guests laughed. Champagne flowed. The sunset turned the harbor gold. Everything looked perfect. And yet all I could think about was a dead grandmother and a lawyer waiting somewhere in Charleston. The reception began. Dinner was served. Toasts started. By then I had found a quiet corner near the parking lot and called the number. A man answered immediately. Lauren, yes, this is Robert Kessler. His voice sounded older, measured, professional. The kind of voice people develop after spending decades delivering uncomfortable facts. I represented your grandmother for nearly 20 years. I leaned against a brick wall. What is this about? A pause, then, your grandmother left instructions regarding certain documents. Those instructions activated after her death. My stomach tightened. What documents? Financial records. That got my attention immediately. I worked in compliance. Financial records could mean almost anything. What kind of records? The kind your grandmother believed you would eventually need. The wedding music drifted faintly from inside. I listened carefully. Why now? Another pause. Because the triggering event finally occurred. I frowned. What triggering event? You were publicly excluded. The words landed harder than I expected. For a moment I couldn't speak. Robert continued. Your grandmother anticipated several possible scenarios. Being removed from family events was one of them. I closed my eyes. What are you talking about? Your grandmother spent years documenting concerns involving your parents' finances. My heartbeat accelerated. Documenting what concerns? I'd rather discuss that in person. When? Tomorrow morning. The reception doors opened nearby. Guests spilled outside laughing. I stepped farther away. What exactly did she leave? Silence, then an envelope. I almost laughed. An envelope. That was it, 18 months after her death. One envelope. Apparently Robert sensed my reaction. It contains copies, not originals. Copies of what? Bank records, property records, correspondence, trust instructions. My mouth went dry. Trust instructions. I thought about my grandmother sitting at her dining room table, asking strange questions, watching people carefully, making notes. What did she think was happening? I asked. Robert's answer came quietly. She believed you were financing a lie. Then the line went silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Meet me tomorrow at 10. Bring identification." "Okay, one more thing." "What?" "Do not discuss this with your mother." The call ended. I stood alone in the dark parking lot listening to distant wedding music. Then I went back inside and immediately walked into another surprise. The family portrait slideshow had started. Hundreds of childhood photos rotated across giant screens. Ava, my parents, vacations, birthdays, Christmases, graduations. I watched image after image appear, then disappear. Something felt wrong. At first I couldn't identify it, then I realized I was barely in any of them, not completely absent, just minimized, cropped, missing, standing at the edge, sometimes excluded entirely. A lifetime condensed into a slideshow, and somehow I looked like a distant cousin, not a daughter. Not a sister, an extra, a supporting character. The realization settled over me slowly. This wasn't new. It had been happening for years. I had simply never viewed my life all at once before. The next morning, I drove into downtown Charleston alone. The law office occupied the second floor of an older brick building. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Exactly the kind of place my grandmother would trust. Robert Kessler met me in a conference room. Gray hair, navy suit, large reading glasses. A thick file rested on the table beside him, and beside the file sat a sealed manila envelope. My grandmother's handwriting covered the front. For Lauren, only if necessary. I recognized the handwriting instantly. The sight of it hit harder than I expected. For a moment I couldn't move. Robert gestured toward a chair. I sat. The room suddenly felt very quiet. "Your grandmother was extremely thorough," he said. "I remember." A faint smile appeared. "Yes, she was." Then he opened the file. The first document slid across the table. A bank statement, my parents' account. I looked at him. "Why are you showing me this?" "Look at the deposits." I did. The account showed monthly deposits, regular amounts, consistent. Thousands of dollars every month, my money. I recognized the transfer amounts immediately. The room seemed to tilt. "These are mine." "Correct." I kept reading. The deposits stretched back years, longer than I expected, almost 10 years. Every transfer carefully documented, every amount highlighted. Then Robert placed another document beside it, casino withdrawal records, hundreds of them. The dates matched, the amounts matched. A pattern emerged almost instantly. Money arrived, cash disappeared. Month after month, year after year, I felt sick. Grandma knew, she suspected. Robert adjusted his glasses. Eventually, she confirmed it. He handed me another page, property tax records, then another, credit statements. Then another, vehicle financing documents. The pile grew, each document answering one question while creating 3 more. And then I saw something that made me stop breathing. A payment, large, very large, made 2 years earlier. The recipient wasn't a casino, it wasn't medical care, it wasn't household expenses. It was a luxury wedding venue deposit, my sister's wedding venue. The same venue where I had been removed from family photos. I stared at the number. $32,000. My voice barely worked. "When was this paid?" Robert checked the file. 26 months ago. The engagement hadn't even happened publicly yet. My grandmother had known. The wedding plans had started long before anyone told me, long before anyone asked me to help, long before anyone pretended they couldn't afford things. I looked up. "How much?" Robert knew exactly what I meant. He opened another spreadsheet, prepared by my grandmother. Every transfer, every withdrawal. Every major expenditure. Every year. The total sat at the bottom. I read it once. Then again, then a third time. The number didn't change. $538,417. For a moment, the room disappeared. 10 years, more than $500,000, gone, not stolen legally, worse, given willingly under false pretenses. The kind of betrayal that hides inside trust. The kind that grows slowly enough to feel normal. Robert remained silent, allowing me to absorb it. Eventually, I looked toward the envelope. My grandmother's envelope, still sealed, waiting. What else did she know? I asked quietly. Robert looked at it too. Then he said something that made my entire body go cold. "The envelope isn't about the money." I frowned. "Then what's in it?" His expression changed. Not sympathy, not concern, something closer to caution. "The envelope explains why your grandmother changed her will 6 weeks before she died." The room became very still. My grandmother changed her will. Nobody had ever mentioned that. Nobody, not once. I stared at him, then at the envelope, then back at him. And suddenly I understood why he wanted this conversation before my family left Charleston. Because whatever was inside that envelope wasn't about money. It was about the reason. The real reason. The one nobody in my family wanted me to know. And for 18 months after Grandma's death, they had apparently succeeded. Until now. For several seconds, neither of us touched the envelope. It sat between us on the conference table. Plain, ordinary, the kind of envelope that could contain a birthday card or a utility bill, and yet somehow it felt heavier than everything else in the room. Heavier than the financial records. Heavier than the bank statements. Heavier than the $500,000 I had just learned I'd quietly transferred into my family's life. Robert finally slid it toward me. Your grandmother instructed that only you could open it. My hands felt strangely cold. I ran a finger across the flap. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. For Lauren, only if necessary, I swallowed, then opened it. Inside were several folded pages, a letter, copies of legal documents, and something that looked like a printed email chain. I unfolded the letter first. The first line hit me immediately. Lauren, if you're reading this, then your mother finally went too far. I stopped. My chest tightened. Grandma had known, not suspected. Known, I kept reading. You always believed helping people would make them value you. I spent years hoping your parents would prove me wrong. They didn't. The words blurred for a moment. I blinked hard and continued. I have watched your mother use your reliability the same way some people use credit cards. Every emergency became your emergency. Every mistake became your responsibility. Every sacrifice became expected. And because you loved them, you mistook dependence for appreciation. I lowered the letter. The room felt silent enough to hear my heartbeat. Robert didn't interrupt. He had probably seen people read difficult letters before. I continued. 3 years ago, I discovered your mother was using money you provided to fund expenses she intentionally concealed from you. When confronted, she admitted it. When asked to stop, she refused. When warned she would lose my trust, she laughed. I froze, admitted it. My mother admitted it. To Grandma. The next paragraph answered the question forming in my head. She believed you would never stop helping because she believed guilt worked better than gratitude. That sentence sat on the page like a verdict. I thought about every phone call, every crisis, every emergency, every emotional appeal. Suddenly the pattern became visible. Not love, management, not appreciation, expectation. My grandmother had seen it years earlier. I read on. When I revised my estate documents, your mother was informed she would no longer control any family assets after my death. She was extremely unhappy about this decision. The understatement almost made me laugh. I could imagine exactly how that conversation had gone. Then came the paragraph that changed everything. There is one fact I have never told you because I hoped it would never become necessary. If your mother ever publicly humiliates you, excludes you, or attempts to erase your role in this family, I want you to know the truth. I stared at the page. My pulse accelerated. The next sentence felt impossible. Your sister's wedding was partially funded with money that originated from your monthly support. I read it again, then again. The words refused to change. Partially funded. My money. Her wedding. The wedding I had spent 3 days helping organize. The wedding where my name had been removed from family photographs. My hands trembled. I continued reading. Your mother repeatedly assured me she would eventually tell you. She never did. Instead, she used your generosity to create the appearance that she and your father were financing expenses they could not actually afford. The room suddenly felt smaller. Every memory from the previous 48 hours rearranged itself. The venue, the flowers, the luxury transportation, the designer invitations, the rehearsal dinner, the accommodations, the entire wedding. I had been helping pay for it without even knowing. Then I reached the final page and found the reason Robert had insisted on meeting before my family left Charleston. Attached to the letter was a copy of an email, sent 18 months earlier. The sender was my mother. The recipient was Grandma. The subject line read, "Lauren doesn't need to know." I felt my stomach drop. The email was only a few paragraphs long, but it changed everything. Mom wrote she's happiest when she feels useful. If she knew how much she's contributed, she'd make it about herself. This way, everyone wins. Ava gets her wedding. Roy gets help, and Lauren gets to feel needed. I stopped reading. For a moment, I honestly couldn't breathe. Robert quietly slid a glass of water toward me. I took it without looking away from the page. Everyone wins. The sentence echoed in my head. Everyone wins, except the person paying, except the daughter being used, except the daughter whose name got crossed off the family photo schedule. I finished the email. The final sentence was somehow worse. Lauren always comes back. She doesn't know how not to. I set the paper down. And suddenly I understood something. The money wasn't the betrayal. The wedding wasn't the betrayal. Even the photographs weren't the betrayal. The betrayal was certainty. My mother had been absolutely certain she could do anything she wanted because she never believed I would leave. Robert waited. Eventually, he asked one question. "What do you want to do?" I looked out the conference room window. The wedding brunch was scheduled for noon. Most of the family would be there. Dozens of relatives, friends, guests. People who had spent years hearing one version of reality, my mother's version. I thought about the crossed-out name. The email, the letter, the trust documents, the financial records. Then I asked something else. Who else knows? Nobody. Not even Ava. No, that surprised me. For the first time since yesterday, I felt something close to sympathy for my sister. She had benefited from the lie, but she hadn't created it, at least not intentionally. I sat quietly. Then my phone vibrated, a text from my mother. "Where are you? Brunch starts in 30 minutes. I stared at the message. A second text arrived. "Don't embarrass your sister today." The irony was almost unbelievable. I typed back exactly 3 words, "I'll be there." Then I put the phone away. Robert watched me carefully. "What are you thinking?" I folded Grandma's letter, placed it back inside the envelope, and answered honestly. "I'm thinking my grandmother spent years collecting evidence." He nodded. "She did." "I'm thinking my mother invited an audience." Another nod. "She did." I looked directly at him, and I'm thinking people should hear the truth while they're all still together. For the first time all morning, Robert smiled, not a happy smile, a knowing one, the smile of a man who had watched facts catch up with stories many times before. "I suspected you'd say that." He opened his briefcase, removed several copies of documents, placed them neatly into a folder, then handed it to me. "What is this?" "Everything you'll need." I took the folder. It felt surprisingly light. Amazing how little paper it takes to collapse a lie. An hour later, I walked into the private dining room where the wedding brunch was being held. The room was packed. Laughter, coffee, champagne, families taking photos, celebrating. My mother stood near the center of it all, smiling, hosting, performing, exactly as she always had. She noticed me immediately, then noticed the folder in my hand, and for the first time all weekend, her smile faltered, just slightly. Just enough, because somehow she knew. Not what I knew, not how much, but she knew something had changed. And as I took my seat across the room, I realized something else. For 10 years, my mother had relied on one assumption, that I would protect her version of events. That assumption was about to become very expensive. The brunch began exactly the way my mother wanted. She stood near the head of the room holding a champagne glass. Guests quieted. Conversations faded. Every eye turned toward her. For most people, it looked like a proud mother celebrating her daughter's wedding. For me, it looked like the final performance before the curtain dropped. "Before everyone leaves Charleston," she said warmly, "I just wanted to thank all of you for making this weekend so special." Applause followed. My mother smiled, comfortable, confident, in control. The same confidence she had worn for years. The confidence of someone who believes nobody will ever challenge the story. Then she started thanking people. The venue staff, the wedding planner, family, friends, aunts, cousins, everyone. My name never came up, not once. 3 days of work, 3 days of solving problems, 3 days of carrying responsibilities, and not a single acknowledgement. Oddly enough, that no longer hurt, because for the first time I could see the pattern clearly. People can only erase you if you keep volunteering to disappear. Then my mother reached the end of her speech. She lifted her glass. "To family." The room echoed the toast. Family. Glasses clinked, smiles spread, the perfect ending. At least it would have been if she had stopped talking. Instead, she added one more sentence. The sentence that changed everything. "And especially to Ava, who has always been the daughter who brought everyone together." The room laughed softly. A few people nodded. Most didn't think anything of it, but I saw several relatives glance toward me. Awkwardly, uncomfortably, because even they knew what had just happened. My mother had done it again. Publicly, deliberately. And this time she had witnesses. I stood. The movement was small, but enough people noticed. My mother looked surprised. "Lauren," I smiled politely. "Actually, Mom, before everyone leaves, there's something Grandma wanted shared." Silence, complete silence. My mother's face changed instantly. The color drained slightly from her cheeks. I pulled the envelope from my purse. The room watched. "What is that?" she asked. I ignored the question. Instead, I looked toward Ava. My sister looked confused, then nervous, then concerned, because unlike our mother, Ava could read a room, and suddenly the room felt dangerous. I unfolded Grandma's letter, not dramatically, not angrily, simply carefully. Then I began reading. The first paragraph was enough. By the time I reached, "You mistook dependence for appreciation," the room had become completely still. Nobody touched their coffee. Nobody checked their phones. Nobody interrupted. I continued. Paragraph after paragraph. Sentence after sentence. Grandma's words filled the room. Not mine. Hers, that mattered, because nobody could accuse me of inventing them. When I reached the section about my monthly support, several relatives exchanged shocked looks. When I read the amount, someone actually gasped. Over $500,000. The number landed heavily. Then came the email. The one my mother never expected anyone else to see. I didn't read all of it. I didn't need to. Just the key lines. She's happiest when she feels useful. I looked up. My mother stared at the floor, for the first time in my life. The floor, not me. Not the audience, not the room, the floor, I continued. Ava gets her wedding. Roy gets help. And Lauren gets to feel needed. Nobody moved. The silence afterward felt almost physical. Then Aunt Denise spoke first, quietly. Linda, is that real? My mother didn't answer. That was answer enough. The room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, something subtler. People stopped looking at me and started looking at her. The story had changed owners. For years, she controlled the narrative. Now the facts did. My father sat frozen, looking older than I had ever seen him. Ava's eyes were filled with tears, not anger, shock, real shock. Because for the first time, she was seeing the machinery behind her life. The money, the favoritism, the protection, the invisible support, and most importantly, the source, me, I wasn't enjoying it. That's the strange part people never understand. Real revenge rarely feels exciting. Mostly it feels exhausting. Like finally setting down a heavy object you've carried for too long. Then Robert Kessler entered the room, right on schedule. My mother's face went completely white. The attorney approached calmly, holding a folder, the same folder from yesterday. He introduced himself, then confirmed everything. The trust, the estate amendments, the financial concerns, the documentation, the timeline, every fact, every date, every signature, every warning my grandmother had given before her death. And finally, he explained the part nobody knew. 6 weeks before she died, Grandma changed her estate plan. Not out of anger, out of certainty. She no longer trusted my mother with financial authority, so she removed it completely. Every controlling role, every decision-making role, every management role. Gone. Instead, the trust designated me, not because I was the favorite, because I was the only person Grandma believed would protect it. The room remained silent. My mother finally stood. For a second, I thought she might apologize. She didn't. Instead, she said exactly what Grandma predicted she would. This is unfair. The words sounded small, almost childish. Unfair, not untrue, not inaccurate, unfair. Robert simply handed her a copy of the trust amendment, signed, witnessed, notarized, final. And suddenly there was nothing left to argue with. Paper has a way of ending debates, especially when the paper is correct. The brunch ended shortly afterward, not with shouting. Not with a dramatic scene. People simply left. One table at a time, conversations hushed, expressions thoughtful. The performance was over, the audience was going home. Over the following months, the consequences arrived quietly. The trust remained intact. The attorneys confirmed everything. My parents stayed in their home under the trust's terms, but they no longer controlled anything beyond their own expenses. The automatic transfers never resumed. Not one. My mother called several times. At first angry, then defensive, then emotional, then apologetic. The apologies always seemed aimed at restoring the money rather than repairing the relationship. Eventually, the calls stopped. My father reached out occasionally, mostly short conversations, weather, health, safe topics. Neither of us mentioned the brunch. Neither of us needed to. Ava surprised me. 3 months later, she drove to Charlotte alone. No cameras, no social media posts, no audience, just her. She sat across from me at a small coffee shop and asked one question. How long? I knew exactly what she meant. Almost 10 years. She cried, quietly. The kind of crying that comes from discovering your reality was built by someone else's sacrifice. We talked for nearly 4 hours. For the first time in our lives, it felt like a conversation between sisters, not competitors, not roles, people. After that, things changed slowly, not perfectly, but honestly. And honest relationships are worth more than comfortable lies. A year later, I visited Grandma's grave alone. The cemetery overlooked a small stretch of water outside Charleston, the same city where everything finally came apart, and where everything finally became clear. I brought the envelope with me, the original one. The paper had become softer from being handled, the folds worn, the edges slightly frayed. I sat beside her headstone for a long time, watching the water, listening to the wind. thinking about all the questions she never answered directly, all the things she saw before I did. Eventually, I opened the envelope one last time. Inside was her letter, the trust documents, the email, every piece of proof, every piece of truth. I read the final paragraph again, the one I had almost missed the first time. You were never difficult to love, Lauren. You were simply surrounded by people who found it easier to use your strength than appreciate it. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside, then rested the envelope against the base of her headstone. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt no responsibility to fix anyone. Only gratitude for the woman who had left behind enough paper to tell the truth after she was gone. The envelope sat there quietly in the afternoon sunlight, and somehow that felt like the most honest family photograph I had ever been part of.